Hello, hello, my friends. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face and my card making space. And another rainbow card using only 3 colors, specifically the 3 re-inkers that I used in it'll probably be what my previous video is how I'm going to have things uploaded. I'll have that linked in the end screen at the end of this video if you want to check it out. This time I did a very simple background that I then die cut to create a cluster for my card. And I'm using a couple of the new products from Simon Says Stamps May 2025 release. I'll have a link to that release in the description box below the video, worth checking out. I will of course have many more cards and videos coming using this release, so just stay tuned. And then I will have everything that I used to make today's card. That will also be listed and linked in the description box below the video. My links are affiliate links. That just means that if you click on one of my links and end up placing an order, I get a little kickback from that at no extra cost to you. That is what helps pay the bills, keeps the lights on, and it's getting to that time of year now where I can say it keeps the air conditioning running instead of the heaters running. And enables me to keep bringing out content. So that's it for the chatter. Let's get into making the card. So I'm starting with a panel of watercolor paper. And this time I'm just sticking it to my stamp and stencil mat because the mat's got low-tack adhesive on it. Other times I've shown I just tape it down to a hardboard with low-tack tape. Either one works. That just helps prevent the watercolor paper from curling up, because when you start adding a bunch of water, and this is like thinner watercolor paper as well, when you start adding a bunch of like water and color to it, it'll immediately start to curl up and everything starts to run off the edges. So sticking it to a stamp stencil mat or taping it to a hardboard just helps keep it a little flatter, makes life a little easier. So then I got the watercolor paper wet with just clean water. And then to add my color, I'm using the same 3 re-inkers that I used previously. So Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated re-inkers in Sunbeam, Surf, and Peony. So basically cyan, magenta, yellow. The 3 colors that will make any color. And the thing to always remember when using like re-inkers like this to color with, you just need to make sure you're using enough water, because re-inkers are not meant for watercolor. They're meant to re-ink your ink pads. However, I've watercolored with like any sort of water reactive re-inker I've used off and on for years from many different brands. They work. You just need to make sure you're adding water and not just painting just with the re-inker, because then you're going to run into issues and it might not dry. You can also just smush your ink pads. I do that a lot, just, mushing my ink pads onto my palette and painting with that. The only difference with using the re-inker is you're getting like more concentrated color. So it's a little bit faster. You can get it a little bit more vibrant. And in things like this, I can mix them together a bit easier. So as you can see, I just painted them on and mixing them together. I started with my yellow in the middle, and then I blended on the surf, which when mixed with yellow turns green. And then along the top, I did the peony, which again, mixed with the yellow turns orange. And if I had wanted to, I could have started a little higher up and then transitioned and added pink along the bottom too to turn purple. But I was still fine with this. And then with that stamp and stencil mat, once I was done, I just rinse it off under the sink. I don't use any soap, anything like that. I just rinse it off with water to remove any excess ink. And then I let it air dry and then reuse it. So once this panel was completely dry, I'm die cutting the whole thing using this new Bright Butterflies little wafer die set. Love it. Love it. You can't go wrong with butterflies. I love butterflies. I had told y'all earlier this week that be prepared for a bunch of butterfly cards, because that's just what I'm fixated on lately. And this little set is so cute. They're not too tiny and yet they're not too big. And there's all the piercing and pattern detail pierced into them as well. So I just die cut, like I said, this entire panel, and I got just a stack of butterflies out of it. And then I am going to arrange them onto an A2 card. So this is going to be a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card. I just have the whole thing like unfolded here right now. And I'm going to adhere them in rainbow order, just kind of ascending up like the center of the card basically. And I'm only applying glue right where the like body is. So then the wings are all popped up. So this just creates like a ton of texture and dimension with very little effort, really. This part's a tiny bit time consuming. I've sped it up, you know, in editing, but it's still one of those things where it's like you can kind of zone out, listen to some music, you know, you have a show on, whatever. So I had like roughly laid them out first just to make sure I had enough. Because at first it was like, oh, there's a ton of these, you know, I'm going to be able to make like so many cards. But once I actually kind of laid them out on the card front, I was like, nope, I have just enough to do one. And I set aside one of each color because of course we're going to add something to the inside. So I just kept working my way down, just adhering them in the rainbow order. And then I've got, yeah, just this cluster of butterflies. This was really fun. I've done cards somewhat similar to this, like way in the past. I was inspired years ago. I'm like, goodness, almost 20 years ago now, I think, roughly. It was a Martha Stewart magazine cover. And it was like a white, I think it was a white cake, like a wedding cake with a rainbow of butterflies of it. Something like that. That has stuck with me. And I was so inspired by that literally 20 years ago with card making. I remember making cards back then. And that was kind of in the back of my mind. I was reminded about it when I was doing this. And I was like, oh yeah, that cake that I loved so much. I probably still have that. I might still have that magazine somewhere. It's in a bin somewhere because, yeah, you know, back when magazines were still a thing, where we had to get most of our inspiration that way and we didn't really have much of the internet. Anyway, we're not going to go there. I'm going to add splatter, of course. So I taped my card closed first, just so I don't get splatter on the inside. And then for my first bit of splatter, I'm using the Altenew Iridescent shimmery spray. I've used this in a few other videos, and I thought about this afterwards. I could have sprayed the panel before I die cut it with this, and it would add shimmer. That would have been fun. But instead, I just, you know, mixed it up really well, put it on my palette, and just splattered it, keeping it mostly concentrated on the butterflies. And then after that, I added white gouache to my palette, added a bit of water to thin it out, and then splattered that, also keeping it mostly to the butterflies, but still splattering it kind of on the card base as well, because it just adds a little bit of extra texture, a very subtle texture, which I'm not always subtle, especially not with my cards, but it's got a place. Black splatter would have looked great too. I thought about it, but I decided to keep the card base and the butterflies just as is, and then that way the sentiment will pop even more. For the sentiment, I've used this one many times, but what's part of the new release, finally, is the coordinating die set. So this is the CZ Design Thank You Basics stamp set that came out a couple of months ago, something like that. And I've used it multiple times, and I did use the die set in a previous video, and I had kind of teased y'all and said, like, just stay tuned. So yeah, the coordinating die set is finally officially available. Hooray. Love. Because I am too lazy to fussy cut, especially sentiments. I prefer the coordinating wafer dies. So I white heat embossed the sentiment onto black cardstock. And then after I buffed away that excess anti-static powder with my little microfiber cloth, I die cut it with the coordinating wafer die. Love. And then to adhere this to the card front, I am going to pop this up with some foam squares. So it's kind of like floating on top of these butterflies. I kind of like when things work out this way. This is my version of clean and simple. I've kind of talked about this before. I love clean and simple. I love watching other clean and simple card makers. I don't know, it's kind of fascinating to me because I'm going to add everything but the kitchen sink, you know? So this is my version of clean and simple. You know, just a rainbow of a bunch of die cuts and 2 types of splatter and then a floating sentiment. So then on the inside of the card, after I got the sentiment adhered, I'm going to stamp another one of the sentiments from that Thank You Basics set onto the inside of the card. And I'm going to use the VersaFine Claire Nocturne ink to stamp that. And then once I've got that stamped into place, I had mentioned earlier that I had set aside one of each of the colors of the butterfly die cuts to adhere to the inside, just to give it that little extra something. So stamp the sentiment, and then I can cluster those few little butterflies, and I'm going to like cluster them even closer together. And that still leaves plenty of room on the inside of the card to write something. So just adhere those down. Once I get those adhered into place, I just got to let the glue dry, and this card's complete. I thought about adding like even, tucking in some bling and that around all these little butterflies on the card front, but no, wasn't needed. We've got, all that color and the splatter and the shimmer and just the texture of all that detail in those little butterflies, and then the sentiment just pops. This was good. I enjoyed making this. So, like I mentioned in the intro, you can check out the new release and all the supplies used, etc. That's in the description box below the video, so you just expand that. Everything will be listed and linked there for y'all. And thank you all so very much for hanging out with me, for thumbs upping and commenting. It helps a ton. I very much appreciate it. Subscribe if you haven't. I'd love to have you. And I'll see you all very soon in the next one. Bye. Thank you so much to my amazing Patreon supporters. For anyone that might be interested in joining my Patreon community and supporting me, the link to my Patreon is in the description box below the video. For everyone else, as always, thank you all so much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't. I'd love to have you. And here's a couple other videos for you to check out in case you missed them. Bye!